Anyway, right now we are here to hear, hi, Ileana, Kathleen McInerney, McInerney. Oh. What? It rhymes with Bert and Ernie. Okay. But I don't see either of them here.
No, didn't speak Gaelic yet.
Here.
All right. Fall asleep.
One go away? One night? Not sure how it goes.
Well, I'm delighted to be here tonight with you. And I probably, perhaps I'm more interested in the history of your organization than you are interested in mine. I'm not sure, but it's fascinating to me. We've been chatting up here, and I salute you all for the intellectual sharing, repartee, and dialogue that you are committed to, and that you welcome here. So that's a wonderful thing.
So why don't you come sometime?
I may. I'm a Southsider, but I realize a lot of you come from far away.
Southside. 22 months are archived online, so.
So, yeah, I'm Kathleen, and I'm a professor of education at St. Xavier University on the South Side, the Sisters of Mercy. And I belong to this group, which I'm going to tell you about, and we can talk about some of the big issues that are happening in education and public education right now. This is probably one of the hottest and most contested issues in the city of Chicago right now. But let me tell you a little bit about myself first. So get a picture of me. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and daughter of a steel worker, Bethlehem Steel, and a nurse. And they taught me that a lot about equity and fairness in the world. And so I have to honor that and say thank you to my parents for putting me where I am. When people ask me, how'd you get a PhD? I say, I don't know. It's sort of an accident. You know, I was not from the family where I was the first one in the college, who attended college, so it's not expected that I would end up achieving that, but I did. I just kind of kept going, I guess. And I got married, and my husband and I lived in Davenport, Iowa for 22 years, and he taught at St. Ambrose. So I'm a Quad Cityan as well, and then I moved to Chicago 13 years ago to the South Side. Before I taught at Augustana College in Rock Island, and then at Chicago State for a number of years, and then St. Xavier made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I primarily work with people with pre-service and in-service teachers. So I started out as an English major. I love words, I love language, but the activist in me thought, oh, it's kind of selfish just to study 20th century American literature. I need to do a little bit more. So I started working with schools. I've taught I've taught everybody. I've taught preschoolers through graduate students. Are there any other teachers? There's a professor here. Any other teachers? Awesome. Okay. So the people I primarily work with now are getting the coursework that they need from the state of Illinois to become English as a second language or bilingual teachers. Now, in my world, I live in two sides of the equator. I also live in Ecuador, where I help run a school. I help to found and run a school. We had a vision of a good school, and we managed to start it. And it's a very progressive school. It's very Deweyan and in its focus, Montessori. The children are very much, they learn hands-on. We add a grade every year. We're up to 9th grade this year. I'm in the ironic position of sending my students who get fired from their jobs at CPS to Ecuador where they can get a job. And it's actually one of my research interests right now is to follow expat teachers who flee CPS to go to other countries and teach. So I know quite a bit about comparative education, particularly Latin American education, and I'm very interested in dual language education is one of my interests as well. So that's a little picture of me. CReATE, it's a lot of words. I always forget when people say, what is CReATE? I say, oh, Chicago Advocates Education. Yeah. Chicagoland Researchers and Advocates for Transformative Education. We started in fall 2012 because we were all pretty frustrated. This isn't a real PowerPoint with like a lot of words. It's more like a chop-a-chop.
Mike,
use the mic.
Yeah, my teacher's voice is not enough.
you can take it with you.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. So we started, we were getting more and more stories from parents, stories from teachers. Just generally, there are too many tests. Too much testing is going on. So we started to organize around the issue, two issues actually, of testing, high-stakes testing, and the longer school day. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So, who are we? Over 100 of us gathered in the fall of 2012 at the DePaul University Law Library downtown and said, there's a lot of information in the newspapers every day about education, about public schools, and it's not coming from education researchers. It's coming from politicians who don't have backgrounds in education. So we felt that it was really important. Sorry, I'm sick, I have a cold, so if my voice goes in and out, I apologize. We felt, because not one of us has ever been consulted by the mayor or the CEO of Chicago Public Schools or board members about research on education. We thought maybe it would be good to infuse some research into the dialogue about public schools and public school policy. So what we decided to do was that we're researchers, we write, and we gather research, and we research. That we needed to put out some fact sheets. I'm going to give you one in a moment. So that we could provide a counter-narrative to the narrative that was coming out of the mayor's office and CPS about what's best for children. So there are a lot of us. I just put a few pictures up here. We represent UIC, Loyola, DePaul, St. Xavier, University of Chicago, Roosevelt, School of the Art Institute, Lewis, the area. I think every college is represented. And we are School of Education researchers. Some of us are statisticians, some of us are ed psychology, some of us are multicultural education, multilingual education, curriculum. We all have different areas, but we all have the common background of being researchers in the field of education. So what we gathered to do was to offer research about education policy. And we wrote these research briefs, and we kept them fairly short, and we wrote them to be accessible to parents and everyone. So when these fact sheets are multilingual. for different caregivers, different linguistic backgrounds. They're carefully researched. And we provide credible resources. One of the problems we were noticing was that Jean-Claude Brizard, remember Brizard, was quoting things that had no research base. And this disturbed us as people who have committed our lives to honesty and research. So that was another impetus for us to pull this together as best we could. So we created fact sheets, and I just put some pictures up here. We have a lot of them on our website. And I went back to the first one that we did on testing. And so we have it in English and Spanish. And then another one on teacher evaluation, which we can talk about in a minute too. And we wrote on, the teacher's actual workday. A lot of people think teachers go home at 2:30 and spend June, July, and August at the beach. But that's not what their days are like at all. So we can talk about that too. And we talked about the TIF, so the funding of, more recently, giving TIF money to DePaul to create a stadium rather than to schools. And school safety, that research report focuses on children, on LGBTQ children, any kind of children who are at risk of being bullied in schools. That was the focus of that one. And then our most recent ones have been about charter schools and school closures. I brought the school closure one for you tonight. It was a lot. I didn't want to kill too many trees, so I just brought the most recent one. And what do we do besides, be academic and write this stuff up in our offices? And we communicate. Our goal is to communicate what we know about what's true about public education. And so we have a website. We have a Twitter feed. We have a Facebook. We use social media to try and get the information to as many people as possible. And we collaborate and advocate. I'm glad you said advocate, because that's a really important word here. And this is my last slide. I'm not a PowerPoint kind of person. I'm more a dialogue person. So we collaborate with a lot of parent activist groups, and there have been many that have emerged in the last couple of years, including the one I work most closely with, 19th Ward Parents. And Raise Your Hand is a big group of parents and teachers more on the north side, and some of you may know them. And Julie Westhoff of Pure, she's the executive director of Pure Parents for something education. I forget. I'm sorry. I'm not good at those.
Parents United to Reform
Thank you.
Education.
Thank you. Are you a Pure member?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
I hang out.
But you know all the words. Thank you. Yeah, I worked with Julie last winter to bring Monty Neal, who works in Boston, and he's the director of fairtest.org. And he shows how high-stakes tests are inequitable, and now people are using the word they're abusive. And we can talk about that too, that there are so many tests, and children are so overburdened by them, and psychologists are saying traumatized by them. First graders who spend over a month of the school year being tested. So Pure is another big organization in this, and we in CReATE look at the research, write the research, share the research, and then we collaborate as well. And not only in Chicago, but also with CORE, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, which is a national group as well as a Chicago group. EDU4 is a group I'm working with in New York. with Teachers College. And so there are lots and lots of groups like this. And there's a new one that emerged this week, Badass Teachers, which has gained 9,000 members in 1 week. It's interesting because these teachers are tired of being nice about things and scared about their jobs and having to subject children to things that they don't think are good for them as students, and they're angry. And so they have formed Badass Teachers. And
That's a good example for the young.
I'm sorry, what? So I'm going to pass around right now. You don't have to read it, but you can glance at the beginning of it if you want to. The CReATE, thank you, research brief about school closures. Because obviously this is one of the most recent events and most disturbing events.
Thank you.
It'll pass. Thank you.
Would you like me to get you some soup?
Fabulous.
Minestrone, beef noodle.
Minestrone.
Got it. Well, thank you very much, sir. Jean? Change back, sir. Well, yeah. Hey, Jean? Here. Hey, Jean? Here. No cord?
Thank you.
Like the people ignoring this care. Like the people ignoring this care.
So, I'm good. Thank you. I'll just say some of the information that we have in this particular brief is about the strategies that the mayor is using to close public schools. And previously, they had used underperformance as their barometer for whether a school should close or not. There are a lot of reasons why underperformance is a bad way, it's a bad metric. And it's also one that can be a little bit dangerous for politicians to try and use. So what they did was they switched tactics to underutilization. And they, when I first started going to Ecuador, I would walk into classrooms and there'd be 60 kids in the classroom. I'd say, oh my God, I don't know how they do this. Thank you so much.
Welcome back.
Oh.
Thank you very much.
And now I'm walking into classrooms and I'm seeing 60 kids. And so suddenly, in terms of education, I feel as if we've become a developing nation. And that developing nations are doing better than we are in education. So underutilization, as you read through this, you can see that the metrics that they used that CPS used to decide who was utilized and who was underutilized and who would close are shaky at best. Thank you.
Welcome here.
I'll give you one example. One high school 2 years ago on the south side was told not to admit any more freshmen. And I said, okay. The next year CPS came back and said, you're underutilized. We're going to have to close you. In terms of testing and performance, what will happen is they're told, the school is told that their students have to achieve a certain rank in terms of academic performance. What happens is that's a moving target. So schools will get their kids up to the test score that was asked, and then they'll be told, oh, no, it has to be higher than that. And from my perspective as a teacher educator, it's becoming emotional, it's becoming traumatizing, it's becoming whether, you know, I share this experience with a lot of other people in the teacher preparation field, is we vacillate between outrage and despair. Students don't want to become teachers anymore. They feel as if teachers are disrespected, that they are villainized as being tax dollar hogs.
Thank you, sir. Some more soup, honey?
And my recent graduates, you know, I have marched with them on the streets as they've lost their jobs. And as I said, I did send one of my graduates to Ecuador after she got ripped or fired from Evanston, this Evanston school district. So we're seeing people take directions that they were never prepared for in school. I also have other students of mine entering charter schools and being very disturbed about the pedagogical techniques they're being mandated to use, that they don't fit with what they learned in developmental psychology, in educational psychology, in methods, in their observations, and all that. So we do seem to have this giant disconnect between educational policy and education research. And that's what CReATE is about. So it might be useful now for us to, you know, I can walk around and I'd like to hear what you think about these issues, because if we as education researchers are not getting our message out or getting it out clearly, then we're not doing a good enough job.
So you're going to questions right next, or?
Yeah. So we can have some questions or dialogue, however you want to frame it.
All right. Corporations lay off employees all the time when their markets shrink or their demographics shrink. There's layoffs of staff because of revenue cuts and other things like this. If a school system is not having, is experiencing a decrease in enrollment in students, why would there not be layoffs, school closures at a district?
Okay, I have a couple responses to that. The first one would be, we have to, I think it's really important for us to remember as humanists, as people who think about the world, that it's a dubious connection to overlay a business model on top of students. Children are not products. Although Arnie Duncan refers to portfolios of students, I strongly disagree with that construction of who children are. So that's one response that I have to that. Yeah, I understand that. Two is, we have had a shrinkage of population in Chicago. But think about chicken and the egg. If we want to keep people living in neighborhoods where the school is the anchor, and then we take away that community's anchor and make that entire community vulnerable, then why would people feel a reason to stay in that community? So some would argue that the removal of access to public services, mental health clinics, hospitals, and schools has the consequence of making neighborhoods uninhabitable, or certainly not on your first choice, on your list.
All right, Bob Lichtenberg?
You mentioned evaluation of teachers, but then you were thinking about it, so you don't bring it up later.
Right, no, I said we come back to evaluation of teachers. What, do you want to start?
Does the research indicate about how teachers should be evaluated? Should they be evaluated by the students who might just want the easy way out? They don't want to work hard. They give a negative evaluation to our teacher who makes them work hard. So how should...
It's a great question. A lot of places are adopting this value-added measurement. It's called VAM, the VAM score, value-added measurement. So that teachers are evaluated in terms of how the students perform on standardized tests, right? And that's not the only measure, but that's a big measure. I don't want to say the percentage in CPS right now, but it's.
Why not?
I might be wrong. It might be 30%. I'm just not sure. The contract is difficult. When you measure a teacher's performance based on his or her student's performance, that assumes, again, that children are products and will all perform in the same way. And that's not how kids work. Some kids don't have parents. 40% of CPS students do not live with their parents. They live with other caregivers. 40%. So it's these kinds of complexities of children's lives that we don't address, but we think we address when we say, well, we'll see, does the teacher make the student learn? Well, that's a really good question. Does the teacher make the student learn? There's no correlation right now, none, that we have between what we see as student performance and teacher performance, because there are far too many variables in that. Also, if you take and you evaluate a doctor who is at a hospital, I don't even know them, a hospital in Wilmette, right? A really resourced hospital. Evaluate that doctor based on, do that doctor's patients get better? And then compare that with a doctor who works at Roseland or Jackson Hospital. You've got very different circumstances. You've got poverty, people who can't get their medications, you've got non-compliance, you've got language issues, all kinds of things. So we keep looking for the easy answer to these difficult questions, but they're not so simple. And the business model works if you're working with products, but children are not products.
John Erickson?
So I didn't finish that. How do you evaluate good teaching? You triangulate your methods. You use observation by an administrator who knows the teacher. You have peer observation. You do include student comments. You do have conferencing. You have mentors. You way before you fire everybody at a school. Everybody at a school is you work with those teachers. And a few years ago, and it's still happening, but I remember it best a few years ago, what would happen is schools that were underperforming were then subject to having their resources taken away.
Oh.
Right. You are underperforming, so you're not getting books this year.
What?
Yeah.
Bless you. It's crazy.
Welcome to Ron's world.
We have gone down the rabbit hole.
All right. Next question, John Erickson.
Could I use the mic? Very briefly. Well, my mother was a teacher. She was first a teacher during the impression in the black community of Chicago, and she finished as a teacher in the Villa Park schools. And she explained to me that if you have 30 children in the class, there's no education going on. Well, Brown wants a minimum of 40 or 50 in a class. This is not education. This is warehousing.
This is the time for questions.
Yes.
Well, my question is, I believe in individualized education, and especially for disadvantaged, like autistic children, definitely need individualized education. What's the proper number? Wouldn't 20 be fully utilizing a classroom?
Certainly it would be. The utilization numbers are being thrown around with from the mayor's office and from Barbara Bird Bennett. Why do they always have to have B names? With no research behind them. One of the most disturbing things most recently has been the state superintendent, Christopher Cook, is the state superintendent of education, and he is a former special education teacher, which is why it's so disturbing to me. And I know Chris. You may have read that there's a bill before, it's a public comment right now, and up for public comment, and it actually expired for public comment, but so many people were so upset that they decided to have hearings on this bill, but they only had them way north, is to eliminate the limit to class size for special education children. So according to our state superintendent, there needs to be no special ed students don't need to have any more attention than anyone else. I don't know how it's even going to work with the laws for special education students, but that's one of the issues that we're fighting right now, that there be class size limits for special education students. They're disappearing in Illinois.
What about the rest of us in the house? Oh, excuse me, Margaret Aguilar has the next
No,
question.
I didn't have my hand up, but Ayala had her hand up.
Same gender. Okay. Two questions. First of all, speak a little bit about the legal rights of children. I know that you mentioned special ed. There's a lot of legal rights and research behind them as far as integration versus isolation. So speak a little bit about that. Second, I didn't hear from you anything about what is the research that you are doing, any findings that you have. I mean, you just mentioned research, but...
Personally, my research? Or the CReATE research?
The group. What kind of research findings did you come that will give you ammunition to fight with?
Oh, that's what these research briefs are about. So each of them has one of the hot topics, right? So that the topic might be the TIF districts, or charter schools, or school closures. This is what we focused on for each of our research briefs. I only brought you one, but you have the website at the bottom, and I showed them on the slideshow, the English and Spanish. So that's what we put together. That's the research that we put together. Yeah. One of the interesting things in my own personal research that I will share, that I've been, I worked on this, but I also worked on my own. And I worked for a long time with an organization called Grow Your Own Teachers, which is in Logan Square. And the idea of Grow Your Own Teachers is that there are assets in the community. You know, the rate of teachers leaving urban schools is 50% leave within four years, and they're gone. They go to suburbs. And it's not the kids, it's not the schools, it's the administration. Overwhelmingly, they say, is the reason they leave. If you're interested, Charles Payne at the University of Chicago has written a fascinating book called So Much Reform, So Little Change, where he documents, and he includes Chicago in here, where he documents that there are mandates from on high. Okay, now we're all using this strategy. Now we're all using co-teaching. Now we're all, and at this point, now we're all using Common Core state standards. And these things teachers can work for a year or two together in groups, and they'll work really hard to create curriculum that fits the latest mandate. And as soon as it's done, we're switching to the new, whatever the new is. And I've been saying for a long time, a moratorium on education reform. Just stop. Let's do what you asked the teachers to do the last time around, and let's see how that works. Because it's very demoralizing to be told to work, and then say, okay, that was fine, great, but no, we're doing something else. I worked with Grow Your Own Teachers. The idea was that we create a different pipeline of teachers. So we recruited parent volunteers who were in the schools in Logan Square, and Ames, and I'm too fuzzy from this cold to remember, Monroe, Funston, and we said, these parents are volunteering in the classroom. Wouldn't they be good teachers? Also, the parents in this community speak Spanish, they're multicultural. Let's see what we could do. So we got a federal grant, eventually became a state grant, and we would ask these young parent volunteers, would you like to become a teacher? And many of them would be, oh, Dios mío, I never thought I would love to be a teacher, but I can't be a teacher, I don't have the resources. And we helped them, we get those resources. We had them, we took our classes to them. So I taught in Funston School and in Monroe School. I taught college classes in their community. And then as they took a few more courses, maybe got through a year's worth of work or 2 years, they came down to Chicago State. And, you know, sometimes that drive is 3 hours. And they carpooled, and they took public transportation, and they came down to Chicago State, and we taught them how to be college students and to deal with bureaucracies. And they became braver. And I worked with the faculty, helping these people who were becoming teachers say, look, let them speak home language in the classroom. Use examples from their communities. Use examples from their home countries. We need to make a match here between their worlds and our teaching.
Take it away.
And that worked. We've graduated, I think, 30 maybe of these students. They don't leave within 4 years. They understand the communities, and they live in the communities, and they want to make all of this work. So this was something we proposed, we got funded, and has been a phenomenal success. And of course our budget has been reduced, right, but.
So, legal rights.
Yes. Next question.
No, she didn't finish the question.
Oh, here.
I actually am going to finish the question. I'm not a legal rights person. I know about bilingual rights and the law, and Lau versus Nickel and other kinds of cases. When we get to the legal rights, that's something I've been teaching myself about, and also we've all been exploring with opting out of testing. Can I, as a mother, say my child is not going to take that test, for instance? We have legal specialists in our group in CReATE, and they help advise us. And Monty Neal, the head of Fair Test for Boston, he has helped Julie Westoff and me understand the law better. And Julie has an attorney on the Pure staff who's wonderful. She's an attorney for children with special needs and understands testing and school law and all of those things. It's a lot of information, and it's not my specialty. although I continue working on it so I can help parents understand, yes, you can refuse to have your children take that test. So I'm not going to talk about stuff I don't know about.
Neil.
Thank you. My question is really about your initial premise. You started out by saying that the people running things are not acting in accordance with the facts. Well, one fact is that the city of Chicago is being sold off wholesale as fast as possible. As much tax money as possible is going into big pockets. So from that perspective, the charter school movement is succeeding very well. Nationally, the Rust Belt here is the largest remnant of strong unionism. So in terms of smashing unions, things are proceeding successfully. You talk about a whole different style system jive every 2 years. Well, if a suit wants some glorious things on his resume, then saying, well, I made all these changes looks cool to the other suits, so that's actually functional and successful. So my question is, when you say that the people running things are not acting on the facts and you want to give them the facts, don't you have it backwards?
You're right. That's a really good point. They don't understand how children learn.
They don't care.
Right,
That's
exactly.
not on the agenda.
And that's what people need to understand, because Ron keeps repeating, we're saving children who are trapped in awful schools. And one of those schools is Lafayette on Augusta. And they have a fabulous, the only string orchestra in the city. And they're not trapped in their schools. Families in communities like their neighborhood schools, even if they're kind of mediocre, because they're so important to their community.
Rahm is not going to get close enough to this to wipe his bottom with it. So the people you're trying to talk to are not going to listen to you. What are you doing?
We're talking to you. We're trying to talk to everybody. Clearly, there is a design to all of this. We're not naive about that. If you can close a school and then open a charter school halfway down the block, you've got something going. Do you remember during Hurricane Katrina, or right after, Arnie Duncan said Katrina was the best thing that could have happened to the New Orleans public school system? Right. Disaster capitalism is at work. So when we are told there's a crisis in education, that's an engineered crisis. Our children aren't in a crisis. I'm actually taking a fabulous course right now online through Johns Hopkins with Fred Mednick, who's the founder of Teachers Without Borders. And on the first night, and I'm behind on my work, but right at the beginning of the course, I said, Fred, we're not in Palestinian refugee camps here. We have not had a tsunami hit us. But we have X number of young black and brown men and women and babies killed every night. We have school closures. We have mental health clinics, hospitals, access to services disappearing. And he said, you're right. You are in a disaster in every way that I define it. So that's how I'm trying to look at the issue now. But you're absolutely right. There is a plan in place. And there's a lot of profit to be made in education.
Charles and then Victor.
I don't need that. Kathleen, on your research brief, you say that if the student is displaced, they're likely to become violent and not do well and have to go to summer school. Isn't it equally possible that a student would do better if they change the conditions? I mean, I went to a lot of colleges over the years, and I didn't become violent. Why would you become violent?
The children.
Children who don't have many resources, school represents the cornerstone of their community. The teachers who are there for years and years and years represent, oh yeah, your brother had so-and-so, your sister had so-and-so. That's a continuity that's being taken away. Particularly if you close a school, Trumbull, for instance, that has a very high percentage of special education students. When you talk about becoming violent, when you change the environment on special education students, there's a reaction. For every action, there's a reaction, and they're going to be not only special education students, but mainstream students who are very angry. You may have seen the YouTube videos of the tears and the anger and the writing of letters of children in these schools. Please don't close my schools, because the schools they're going to aren't necessarily more resourced.
Talking about statistics, about
Yeah.
a correlation. What is it? I mean, likelihood is probability. Do you have a number on what is the likelihood of getting violent?
If you look specifically at the research that's cited at the end of this,
Yeah, you got a lot of it.
right. You can look at the Detroit school system that Barbara Bird Bennett ran, and look what happened to those schools and the children in those schools and the communities and the city of Detroit. When you close down a school in a neighborhood, the neighborhood is not as stable as it was. That's absolutely a fact.
I've noticed that the Chicago public school system owns a lot of property, a lot of land and buildings and so on, and that's a whole lot of real estate. And it's also these schools are very often the heart of their community. You don't, if you have kids and you want to move to find housing, you look for a community that has a school and is fairly safe. What's happening to those communities when their schools are closed? And I mean, do Chicago public schools have the kind of after-school activities and classes that we've had in New York that I remember? I wonder.
There are two kinds of schools. So the more typical school in a vulnerable neighborhood is going to be the one where the doors close at 3:15 and security says, leave the yard, go. So nobody is there after a certain hour. There are other schools that have re-envisioned themselves, such as Farmington, to be, and there are many others around the city, community centers. That's another way that we can imagine schools, is that they're open way past 3:15, that there are classes, and Funston School has English classes, citizenship classes, all kinds of classes that their parents in the community want, computer classes, and then we delivered college classes in there as well. So rather than make schools separate from communities, the idea is, couldn't we open them up to make these big buildings available to everybody in ways that the community could appreciate. So one school I work with is trying to get a public health clinic to be part of the school. They also have, their focus is on sustainability. So they have organic food delivered to their kitchen every day, and the parents got really interested in it, and they said, how can we get in on this? And so then they blessed it. So they have a cooperative now so that there's more healthy food in the neighborhood. So there are a lot of ways that communities and schools could be interacting that haven't, we haven't pushed the limits of that because of the limits of our own imaginations, I guess.
Given the amount of resources that a district has, if you were, say, the head of the Chicago Public Schools, what would you do now to get things back to normal?
I would sit down and listen to everybody. I'd stop talking and I'd start listening in a real way. I've been to the community hearings on the school closings. And they presented findings that were rejected. Because whose schools are these schools anyway? They're ours, aren't they? Public schools are, we pay for them. So isn't it time for people who run them to listen to what we want for our children?
Victor. Yeah, I have 3 parts. When I was teaching, we had essential classes. Do they still have those?
What classes?
When I was teaching, we had a...
That's all right, other people.
The rest of them don't count? Well, when I was teaching,
Use the
we had
mic.
essential classes. Some of us didn't get as many essential classes as other teachers. Are you going to be evaluated by the number of essential classes because you cannot make them perform the same way as regular classes?
So do you mean essential classes like?
Mentally challenged students.
Oh, I see.
Do they exist now?
Yeah.
Okay, the first.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Well, here, you'll need the mic if you're done.
You want to answer
I
that?
can answer
It's
that.
the first part.
Yeah, there are, in the Common Core state standards, there are no accommodations in the test associated with the, I'm sorry, I moved. The Common Core state standards authors say it is not in our role to suggest how you can make the Common Core standards accommodate special education students or English language learners. So they're not included, they take the same tests.
They take the same.
Yeah.
So they are.
There's no accommodation.
The same.
Yep.
That's a hard. Will a teacher be evaluated by, or can be evaluated by how many movies he shows a year? After all, sometimes the movies are the only thing that keep them quiet in the classroom. How is that taken? Because I know that some of the teachers were using movies quite a bit, and others put more in teaching effort. You remember those, but you forget about essential classes. Before your day.
that in New York, I don't know. Yeah.
So, do they actually can evaluate the teacher by the number of movies they show a year?
Yes, that can be.
Use the microphone. Use the microphone.
Using the microphones, you
Okay.
both. So why don't you think about that we are trying to hear you?
Really? Thank you. I thought you didn't care.
Otherwise we should go home.
I thought you didn't care. Okay, so the second thing is evaluating. And the third one, of course, how can you evaluate? This is all about evaluating the teacher. How can you evaluate the teacher who is teaching in a middle class area, whose students come well fed, who don't come from dysfunctional families, and compare them to the performance of those that have to struggle with teachers that come from dysfunctional families, who have emotional problems and all that. How do they take that into consideration?
That's a really important question that I don't have an answer to. That my only answer is no, they don't take that into account.
Some research for it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that children from the under-resourced neighborhoods experience is a parade of teachers, right? Their teachers don't stay in the schools, and now schools get closed. So we're piling complexities, college of complexes, people, complexities onto students' lives that are more than I think that they should bear, and they certainly aren't going to lead to their academic success or their engagement in school.
Okay, again, what's it gonna take to solve some of these problems? I mean, I know you said listen.
Revolution.
We don't have an elected Board of Ed. We need an elected school board. So if you see people getting together, talking about let's have an elected school board, that's important. Not an appointed school board.
All right,
One of the buzzwords is outcomes. So I'd like to phrase my question in terms of outcomes. What behavioral changes in what people would your group consider a success? What outcomes are your objectives? Who would act differently, and how would their behavior be different?
Interesting question.
How can I tell if you're working?
Right. Well, okay. I'll focus in on an answer to that question. One of the first books I co-authored was about portfolio assessment or performance assessment. So the idea was that students would compile portfolios of their work in the same way that reporters had what they called string books and artists had portfolios. So that my role as a teacher, an English teacher, would be, all right, let's work on writing, and you're going to set goals, and I'm going to look at your goals, and then we're going to meet them, and you're going to show your writing work to a student and I. I'm talking to a student.
Okay.
Okay? So the outcome of that writing process would be that that student would, at the end of a year, be able to,
Who are you talking about, evaluating teachers or students?
I'm not asking about you're saying that you want the teacher to engage in this activity with the student. That means that first the administration either permits it or requires it, and that the administration considers this the proper use of the teacher's time and resource, which is a behavior change on the part of the administration first.
okay, but yeah.
So, and up to not having a real board, and up to a mayor whom I have no polite description for, and so forth.
I started with a really grassroots, inductive example to work up. If we change our notion, when we have standardized testing, we're assuming everybody's the same. Standard, one size fits all, curriculum fits all. But if we change, and let me bring back the writing portfolio, if we change to think of learning as relational, as loving, as human, if we change from a standardized testing model to a totally different humanistic model of learning and teaching, no.
You don't
Hey,
understand.
we're not, I'm not talking about we change. I'm not talking about the people in this room. You keep talking about things that the bosses at the top would have to do radically differently, but you're starting with how those radical differences would look on the ground. What I'm hearing is that you want the bosses at the top to operate on radically different values, and that is the actual performance assessment or of your achieving your objectives. I'm not talking about how it would look at the end or who would benefit at the bottom. I'm saying if I want to tell whether what you're doing is working, I have to know what it's supposed to do. Okay, in my job as a programmer, I have to tell people I can't tell if it works if I don't know what it's supposed to do. Okay, build me a website is not sufficient instruction. Making things different in the classroom. It's not about preaching to the choir, I don't think, okay? Outcome, whose behavior are you trying to change? What are the changes you're trying to make? And how do we get there from here?
Yeah, okay. So we're talking about definitions of what is it to be educated? That's what you're saying.
Behavior.
Okay, so let me go to two places on this. All right, what we're told is that all of these educational changes are to create students who are college and career ready for the 21st century. That's the mantra, right? College and career ready for the 21st century. President Obama says this.
Okay.
All right, so college and career ready, as we understand it, has to do with sorting and ranking. It's a 19th, 18th century conception of how we define people, right? Put them, this class of people will be the workers, this class of people. The problem with defining college and
Behavior. Let her speak.
this is what he's saying, and this is what translates into policy.
You want him to talk differently.
No, let me keep going. I said there were
Okay.
two parts. What we also have going on at the same time is a romance with materialism, and certain folks at the end of it, such as Pearson, with profit. So to create college and career ready people for the 21st century, along with that is a set of tests. Along with that is a set of curriculum, worksheets, books, trainings, schools of education that aren't actually schools of education anymore, because schools of education are being closed down by the same group. You have to understand what's driving the outcomes that you're talking about, the behaviors, is that there is an understanding that money can be made. Just as Halliburton and Blackwater discovered there was money to be made in healthcare, now the same groups, the first group into the public school system in New Orleans was Halliburton. They also understand that every one of those children represents $7,000 a year. $7,000 a year. Well, we're down to $5,000 now in Chicago, apparently, for each student. Students as mobile capital. The behaviors aren't going to change until the understanding of human beings change.
All right, next question is from John Tucker.
Okay, one of the most important elements that hasn't been discussed.
Just a moment. John, would you take the microphone? Because otherwise we may not all hear you.
One of the most important elements that hasn't been discussed, and I think is really critical, is parent involvement.
You see them on the streets in Chicago, they're very involved.
Yeah,
but that's not a
would you pass
question.
the microphone back to the speaker?
I'm actually...
What was the question?
The question was, what is the role of parents?
That's not what he's...
Parent involvement in terms of good schools. Right. And that's a question that we have not addressed very well. For example, in teacher education books, the last chapter is always about parents and community. It's always the last chapter. So we never get to it, right? In traditional, in our teacher training programs, I'll admit that. It hasn't been focused on well. When you look at a program like Grow Your Own Teachers, we focused on the community and bringing the parents in. A lot of superintendents I talk to and principals I talk to say we need to get better at parent involvement. And that has to do with, they understand that many of their parents are working 2 jobs. Many of these kids are going to the jobs with their parents and not going to sleep until 4 in the morning and sleeping at the workplace. That's hard. If we can reconceive schools, if we can agree to, and I say this in my total belief in the will of people to fight for what is right. If nothing else my parents taught me, that's what they taught me. It can change. So if we re-envision our notions of what schools are and what the little people and the bigger people who are in them are and what they're there for, then we would be able to engage them better by becoming community centers. Saying, come in here, we'll be part of your lives. We're not going to say you only come at 10 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, or you only come for report card pickup time. A lot of parents have had bad experiences with school, and they are anxious around teachers in schools. It's something that we have to work really hard on, and if we change schools to become entrenched in the community as an institution that is caring, we can do that.
All right, Tim Bulger.
On to,
Well, no, Tim.
all right, to further
You
you.
had a question, Martin has.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
You've got research in the title of your organization. Can you cite some examples where the research provided you with counters against the people that are trying to push these programs that you oppose?
Counters?
I mean, there's a number of things you've identified as things going in the wrong direction.
Barriers.
Okay, special ed classes get larger, regular ed classes get to 60. Presumably, your research might find out that you can show that this is a bad result. Have you done that, and has it worked?
Have we shown? Oh, I think I
mean,
have.
what does the research produce that helps you toward the goal that you've enunciated, if I may say that? The goal seems to be that at least at a minimum, to come for some of these moves to make the system work.
For instance, I can give you an example that just comes out of the South Side that is part of my research, is when you have parents who push back enough, then policies can change. So the 19th Ward parents, where I live, responded very rigorously, bless you, to the longer school day. And they didn't want a longer school day. And now that we have a massive budget cut, one wonders why that was even entertained as an idea, bless you. But they pushed really hard saying they would, because Jean-Claude Brizard kept saying that Chicago has the shortest school day of anywhere in the world, which wasn't true. And that's what that's what our research, we came back and said, no, that's not true. So then, and of course I'm exaggerating about the world, but in the United States, he said. So he mandated 2.5 hours more to the day, and the 19th Ward parents said, we're not convinced that this is in the best interest of our children. We don't want a longer school day. We have places to take our kids. Now, I'm not against a longer school day, per se, but that's another separate issue. But what we see is that when parents push back enough, policy changes. That's what the research shows.
Is it the qualitative, the quantitative? You have any?
Give her the mic.
I don't want to sound like a library, I can do that, but yes. The research shows us when parents organize, and especially when they can do it in collaboration with other people, the research shows us, and life shows us, that things can change. And I'm giving you the example of the longer school day. But that's not making you happy, and I want to keep the dialogue going.
Is there a shorter school day in the 19th Ward or the 17th Ward?
No, school days are all the same.
Okay, so how did it change?
He gave a half an hour back.
How? What do you mean he gave a half hour back?
The mayor said he would only increase the school day to 2 extra hours instead of 2.5 extra hours.
That seems hardly a research argument, but more like a political argument, that's a political force, where I'd expected you to come back and say, all the research shows that the class size gets beyond 25 in poor neighborhoods.
Oh, absolutely. I can say that, yeah. And research tells us over and over and over again, size matters.
You still not got my question.
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
I'm asking about what your research is part of your organization's title.
Mm-hmm.
And what I expect you to say, come back, is that we did a research project, okay, for the Chicago Public School, where we examined this, that, and the other variable. We found that if you increase this and decrease that, you improve the performance or something.
I see
That
what
was a
you're saying.
convincing argument, okay?
Maybe it's a matter of understanding how. All right, there are two things happening here in your question. I see what you're asking. One is a lot of people are doing a lot of research in Chicago, as well as elsewhere, of course. It doesn't come quickly, right? I mean, you have to write it, and you have to observe, and you have to, you know, the whole research process is not like writing a newspaper article. It takes time. I'm not saying, you know, oh, we can't possibly do that whatsoever. Our people are working on that, and if you look at the work of Josh Nadinsky up at UIC, as well as there are several people working at UIC who showed, for instance, in the school closures, that the percentage of children who were being affected by the school closures were predominantly black and brown children. So that we have an inequitable effect here. So that's one thing that this research shows us.
When that was presented, was it an effective counter to what the mayor wants to do?
Well, researchers really aren't asked by the mayor to present anything.
Bob Lichtenberg has
He's not.
I'm taking too much of your time.
No. What I'm saying is that one of the reasons we began as a group was because we were very disturbed by the quote-unquote research that was informing the narrative coming out of the mayor's office about education. So we put these together of research studies, tons of them that you can look at. This is just a synopsis that counter that narrative. Does that make sense? Did I get at your question?
Bob Lichtenberg and then
Do you know of any research about motivating students to want to learn instead of giving in to what you call the romance of consumerism or the materialism of our age and the economic toilet to which we're all being flushed into, you know, the pressure to get a job and make money to survive? Is there any way to motivate students to want to learn for some shaping research on that?
Yes. The research shows us that student-driven learning is a much more long-lasting, lifelong learner approach to learning. So how do we create student-driven learning? Well, if any of you has ever had a 2-year-old, you know that they are inquiring about their own world all the time. Why? When you have children what happens is kids get into school and they're told to sit in desks. And I'll give you one example of kindergartners in a class last fall who were having to use computers for a task. And what they were doing was they had to use mice, and this was a testing situation. They didn't know how to use mice. They did understand swiping from iPads, but they didn't understand mice. So they were hitting the computer screens with the mice. This is all they knew how to do. And then because they're 5-year-olds and they'd rather go sit with their friends than sit in the same seat, right? They're wired to move and explore, not to sit in a seat. They would get up and they would go sit with their friends. And then other children would come in and sit down and start completing the test that the first child started. The proctor of the test cannot be a teacher of the children because that's not allowed. So the proctor doesn't know the children, so of course doesn't recognize when kids are getting up and changing seats with each other to finish the test. And just to let you know, that's one of the things teachers are evaluated on.
Doug, were you going to ask a question?
I wanted to ask, in your repertoire of research, do you have research from other countries? For example, Finland, that is one of the very top, if not the top, education countries that does not have standardized tests, and they just give their teachers the resources and let them run with it?
I wish I were there this weekend. Pasi Sahlberg, who's the major spokesperson for the Finnish Ministry of Education, is up at Houghton, Michigan at FinFest. And they've been training teachers in Finnish methods this weekend because it's Midsummerfest. They've been training teachers, U.S. teachers, how to use the methods of Finnish teachers. And apparently everybody's leaving really happy. Teachers in Finland are highly respected. They're well paid. They are, their education is paid for when they go to college. It is paid for. And the students, yes, yes and no. Yes, the conditions are all around totally better for teachers there, right? They're not told they're taking tax dollars. They're respected. And they don't have a longer school day. And they are given also continuing education because they're teachers. And they also have time in their school day to plan with each other, which is something that is being taken away from our teachers, or young teachers have never experienced collaborative planning time because it isn't there. We don't have the budget, even though the numbers show that CPS has a surplus. Apparently, we don't. The narrative's telling us no. But yes, research does tell us that if we could adopt a Finnish model, teachers would be happier. They would stay in the profession longer. The profession would have more respect. And children would be better off, as you say, in the results that we see in the PISA test. Yeah.
Yes, Charles.
Yeah, I got thinking, if we go back to 1900, there was a nation of immigrants, in this city in particular, and they produced the greatest generation. And I don't think education was an issue. What happened in the interval to make it an issue? Well, I mean, schools seem to offer promise and seem to be working for a long time.
I'm not sure who has this. Well, I don't know. If we go look at the American Indian reservation schools, those weren't working, right? Those children were removed from their families and put into Carlisle school, and they were beaten if they used Cherokee or what their home language was, and many had to escape. Education for some hasn't been an issue, but for many others, it has continued to be an issue. In Chicago, there were colored schools, right? There were schools that the city decided that because everyone wanted their children to go to school, the city said, well, all right, we'll have everyone go to school, but the colored children are going to have to go to the colored school.
No. We have a question over.
I'm sorry. I'm used to being a teacher.
Yeah, you answered a question about the teachers from Finland and how you said that the teachers in the United States were learning the Finland teachers' methodology. Why did you answer the way you did?
What would you like me to say?
Well, I mean, what difference does it make how they teach there? We are in the United States. The teachers don't have good salaries, the kids are poor, don't have health care.
That's not a question.
Yes, I want to know, what are you trying to tell us?
That's a rebuttal.
Yeah.
I think I'm saying that comparative education and looking at other systems of education is useful to us.
To look at their system?
Many other systems. I'm a proponent of Reggio Emilia education. That comes from Italy. Small class sizes. Libraries and schools, yes. Resources. Right, right. I'm all for those.
This is a different problem then. This is a humongous political problem that we are not going to deal with it now.
Well, whether or not we're going to deal with it is another question. Right now, I think that we are moving into the rebuttal period, and I know that a number of you have remarks to make or questions to raise that will not probably be answered by the speaker right off. She does get the answer to answer all our rebuttals at the end of the evening. But how many of you have remarks to make on this subject? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my goodness. Yeah, 5. At least 5. Possibly 6.
Go with about 6 minutes each.
About 6 minutes you can be allowed. Okay, starting with Francisco Aguilar.
I really support the teachers. They are the hope of not only this nation, but all nations on the world. We are neglecting the future tremendously by doing what we are doing. But my question was really not to discount where you work, but to compromise your standing. We don't need to teach more teachers how to teach. We need to change the whole system. This needs a fundamental revolution. And I am not joking, and I think anybody who take it funny, I think they don't understand what's going on. When we are privatizing the jails in this country, we did privatize the jails. We have more people in jail, especially poor Black and Latino kids in jail, because it's making money for corporations who administer those jails. Not only we privatize the jails, but also the detention centers now. And now we start to privatize grammar schools and high schools. But do not forget that the universities have already become the playfield of the corporations who use the universities to develop their profit-making products. This is a disaster. This is a humongous disaster. We are going down the drain. A philosopher in Spain said 7 years ago about that education is leading to barbarism. Now, why an educator, a philosopher, will say that? And the reason is because he saw that the education was beginning to become utilitarian. And this is what we have here. We don't educate for what the heart decides to know, but we educate to make robots, make money-making robots. Humans and humanity have no place in this type of education. So anyway, we are making, and you mentioned it, and I appreciate that this was a consumerist society, a society who have no end in sight. We have to soon confront the fact that this earth is finite, that we have mined most of the available iron all around the world, which means that we will have to start extracting the iron in different ways from dumps or from leftovers from the tsunamis and things like that. Or from meteorites, like is the latest scheme, the latest nut scheme of corporations who are starting to develop methods to go and pick up iron from meteorites. Where is this going to? So the talk today is touching something in a superficial way that is much more profound as a problem of this society that just the education of the children. How do we challenge the mayor of the city of Chicago? And that was the question that was proposed here. Who are you trying to affect? How do you make a change? It's not by teaching the teachers to teach more or better or anything. When the kids come to school from neighborhoods that they are dangerous, when their friends are being killed every week, when the prospects for any kid in a poor neighborhood is to be enslaved for all his life, this is bad. This is really, really serious. We don't have health care in this country. And you want to compare the teachers from Finland to the teachers here? How can you even pretend to do that? When the mothers have health care before they deliver the kids, how the kids are taken care by doctors throughout their lives. They have psychological health, they have medical health. So, we have to confront this problem in a much more profound way. And I don't think, when I mention revolution, I mean that these powers that be, they are not going to give an inch until people say basta. And we need to say in big amounts and by many people. And see Brazil now. The people, million people are in the streets protesting the corruption and the thing. I think that it's not the Middle East or anything where everything stops. I think it's going to Brazil, and who knows, Mexico, United States. When are we going to say basta?
Good.
All right. Did you ever thank our speaker?
Yes, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.
Doug raised a question back there. Was the only interjection that added anything to what was spoken about tonight. And the speaker's replied to Doug when you mentioned Swiss and compared it with what we doing here. Now, that's sensible to me. I mean, comparing one thing to another one is part of mental contemplation. Asking questions is part of mental contemplation. Abstract and conceptualize, that's human. So, Doug, thank you. And I want to thank the doctor in the back there, because if somebody here got some friends that don't know that words is all that it is, a whole bunch of words, and when you use words like education, now, or love, or whatever it is, you should put in quotation, because what some people call education is junk to me. And like somebody, Nietzsche said, why should the master teach the slave what he knows? King John put the Bible under lock and keys, and he got his people to translate the Bible. That what we so-called read now, called the King James Version. Now, do you think that the king would put anything in the Bible that was anti-King James, that would handicap him, that would wake up his subject, etc., and etc.? No way would that happen. So guess what? We are taught to be what we are. Robots, followers, and consumers. We are not being educated because they don't need, the people that run the show don't need us to be educated, and put that in quotes, education, by the way. Education is being all you can be as an individual. A guy that is programming a television, a computer, is to me not necessarily educated. He's a master computer programmer, but he's not. Have him to talk about the classic, have him talk about philosophy, have him talk about the Pharaoh papers, have him talk about the Constitution. He probably don't know nothing about that. Well, he's not educated because he hasn't been exposed to the variety and the diversity. What comparison is he going to be making before this? So his simple people, the guy in charge giving you what he wants you to have. Now, if education in our country is so bad and it's so important and so forth, ain't a big corporation out there lost shit because of lack of education. Big corporation now has got $1 billion on the papers, on accounting, $1 billion on your earnings sheets, billions of dollars. You got new corporations coming into business, billions of dollars. Hundreds of billions of dollars what they worth, and hundreds of billions of dollars what they're making. And the owners is college dropouts. So people, all of that about he come from a bad home, all these bad teachers, all that propaganda and the distractions that they feed you, let's forget about that. The guy in charge is getting what he wants and we ain't getting shit.
Thank the speaker, very interesting talk. Some of it went over my head, I admit. 50 years ago, I went to a teacher's college. I got a BSED, Bachelor of Science in Education, and an MS, Master of Science, from a second string university. So I'm not an academician, that's for sure. But as an old guy, I learned something about community organizing. And I learned a little bit about education too, because one of the things the speaker didn't mention is something called popular education. She didn't even mention, maybe she did, I was out to the washroom, progressive education. But progressive education and popular education are sort of similar. They sort of assume that you learn experiences, and of course, progressive education, you talk about kids, but I'm talking about seniors. So seniors think they've got a lot of experience, and I guess they do, some of us. And in popular education, you get together a bunch of people, and you talk about what problems and thoughts you have. And sometimes you come up with a problem that perhaps you think maybe you can solve somehow because you know a little bit about it. And then you do what? Research. You do research, and then when you get done with the research, you go into the action phase. You break off a part of that big problem and try to solve that specific thing. Another way of looking at this would be called, I guess, democracy. And boy, that's something we need in this country. We talked about some other countries, and we've had people got up here and waved the flag and said the United States was the best country in the world in every way and every day. I don't believe that. But there are ways you can work on things, but it's tough when you got kids. They cannot do what us old folks can do, and that is make trouble. We can be mean as hell, and we sometimes can get things done. So I guess the kids are really in trouble because they got the parents to are the only ones that can help them, or the public. And I'm not a parent. I know I'm not a parent. I know I'm not a parent. But I am concerned with children, and I think the speaker has a point. I've worked with, at least been in meetings with Rahm Emanuel, and he's a tough guy. Let's say he's a tough guy to deal with. I've dealt with him face to face. And people are going to have their hands full if they want good education in Chicago. Most of them use the American way to solve problems. They run for it. They run to the suburbs until they get a good one for their kids. But most of us seniors are going to stay right here and fight. Thanks.
I'm Michael Foley. Thank you for coming here, Ms. McInerney. I don't mean to be mean to you or derogatory or disrespectful, and I don't want to sound like I'm being negative or discouraging to you. Believe me, I'm not trying to insult you or anything like that. I'm the guy that says government exists to provide bribes for politicians and jobs for precinct captains. And I'm not opposed to a precinct captain having a job. And if you think of that one simple statement and think of what Ms. McInerney said tonight, what I just said goes a long, long way to explain what she has said about how screwed up the public school system is. The public school system, the students in the public school system are a priority to the hierarchy of the school system, but they're a very, very, very low priority. Toward the end of your speech, you mentioned Halliburton and Blackwater, mentioned that they're war contractors. Halliburton and Blackwater make hundreds of billions of dollars off war, and they don't care what happens during a war. They don't have to care what happens during a war, and it doesn't matter to them what happens to the people who are involved in the war, no matter who those people are. Soldiers, civilians, this country, that country, it doesn't matter. What matters to them is they make hundreds of billions of dollars off of war. And the people that own those companies and the big shots that run those companies live like Roman emperors off of war. Schools are probably the same way. I'm sure there are all kind of educational contractors all over this country that are making hundreds of billions of dollars off school systems, public school systems, and they don't care what happens to the students. The students are irrelevant. You mentioned that too, something about Chicago public school system, something like $7,000 a student or $5,000 a student. Actually, I thought it was quite a bit more than that. I thought it was something like $12,000 or $15,000 a student in the Chicago public school system. But the point is, there's educational contractors that are making hundreds of billions of dollars off educational systems, off school systems in this country. And they don't care what happens to the students. All they care about is they make their hundreds of billions of dollars and they live like Roman emperors. This mantra about, I was glad to hear you say this, Ms. McInerney. Schools are supposed to turn out college and career-ready people for the 21st century. I'm not calling you a liar, Ms. McInerney. Anybody that's in the hierarchy of the public school system that says that is a flat-out liar and lying. They can't have their head so far up their ass that they really believe that statement. But that's not what the Chicago public school system is supposed to do. The Chicago public school system exists to destroy the lives and the future of the students who are in the public school system. The Chicago public school system is supposed to turn out people who are essentially useless in the employment world. And I don't know why the empire wants us to be a nation of useless people, except for the fact that the empire, the American empire, is actively, purposely trying to destroy the United States of America. And one of the ways they're doing it is to destroy students in public school systems all over the country. The hierarchy of the Chicago public school system keeps the school system in a constant state of turmoil. That's one of the things Ms. McInerney mentioned. That helps to just screw up the lives of students. Every year or two there's something new, something different, something that has nothing to do with trying to help students learn anything. I actually agreed with this man here, the guy in the blue shirt and the beard. I actually agreed with what his statement was. I almost never agree with that guy, but he mentioned 3 or 4 things that the school system really does very well. But it had nothing, I don't remember what they were. I'm not going to try to list them. I'm not going to try to put words in his mouth. It had to do with the hierarchy of the public school system. The people that work in the high levels of the public school system are getting over real big, money-wise and career-wise. And that's one of the reasons why the public school system exists. And they do that very well. Look at Arnie Duncan. He's a big shot in Washington, D.C. right now. He came from the Chicago public school system. The Chicago public school system was very, very good to Arnie Duncan. Ms. McInerney, you mentioned that place in Ecuador. If you want to have some type of a worthwhile professional experience, some type of a fulfilling professional experience, you might seriously think about going to that place in Ecuador, just moving there and staying there. It seems like you seem very happy with what's going on in that school in Ecuador. There might actually be people in Ecuador that care about helping the students in the school learn something. That's not how it is here in Chicago. You also might find an oil company down there someplace in South America, and you might convince them to kind of finance the school because you're turning out people to help their oil empire. They got to have somebody working in for these oil companies all over South America that know how to read and write. You can find 1 million Indians down in South America there that can work on the oil rigs, but you got to have somebody that knows how to read and write so they can send text messages to the oil company headquarters in Houston to let them know what's going on. You really might have a good life in Ecuador. You might like it. And I'm not trying to be negative to you or anything or hostile by telling you, go out of this country and go someplace else if you want some kind of a decent life. Anyway, that's all I got to say. And again, I'm not trying to say anything at all negative to you, Ms. McInerney.
Hi. My comments are more toward one of the questions than directly toward our speaker. Someone used that fabulous slogan, the greatest generation, and said, why are things so different? Well, to begin with, half of the greatest generation never graduated high school. The school system had a radically different task when it was dealing with so much smaller a fraction of the population. Then, after World War II, someone with a high school education or close to could get a good factory job that could support a family. As we know, that world no longer exists. I actually ran into some numbers. Chicago today has 1/10 as many factory jobs as it had at the end of World War II. So it's not even apples and oranges, it's Venus and Mars. I'm certainly not disparaging what the children of the Depression and the populations in World War II did and accomplished and had to go through, but that doesn't really have enormous relevance to us here and now. One of the monuments of unintended consequences, in the 1920s, Dwight Eisenhower actually led a convoy driving from coast to coast. And I forget, it took something like a month and a half.
56 days.
56 days contribute someone, so my month and a half is in the ballpark. Sufficient precision for present purposes, but thank you. Then in Europe, he saw the Autobahn and was very impressed. And he said, the defense of America needs an Autobahn. Well, the interstate highway system, I don't think, has done too much to defend the country, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We needed it. But it gutted the cities. The interstate highway system was one of the pivotal developments creating urban sprawl. And one of the aspects of urban sprawl, which in my opinion is neglected way too much, is the radical demographic segregation. Racial segregation certainly is not a novelty. I'm a Chicagoan. We don't need to elaborate. But now you live in a suburb with people with the same income level, people with the same marital status, people with the same ages of children. And this is only half caricature because at the outer edges this is the physical fact. It's not the extreme. There is no such thing as public space. The city of Chicago is called downtown, and it's a kind of a Disneyland because sidewalks where they let just anyone walk is a novelty. So we're talking about two different countries and two different societies, and obviously I think we've lost a great deal, but that's not the direction of this conversation. The so-called greatest generation is a different world. We're trying to compare today to 1946 or 1942 is just not real.
You know, in a sense, Neil is absolutely right. We do live in a changed world today compared to that one of 1946. And that world is one where the commodities of 1946 were the basic consumer goods, the basic necessities of life, and some minor goods to contribute to the betterment of life, amongst which was the automobile, the development of the interstate highway system, and other things like that. What is happening today, though, is that the world that we're living in, the main commodity that we're seeing is information. And its relative exchange of information and ideas. Rapid change in our economic things, the speed of change has gone up. We're seeing the biggest demographic shift ever that's predicted over the next century, that our population's aging. And that's going to mean a tremendous shift in everything. You know, more money being spent on healthcare instead of schools, more this for older people, less this for that, you know. And if you look at a recently best-selling book called The World is Flat by Thomas L. Friedman, he talks a lot about these changes. But he also said that the most common question he got after giving this speech was, how are my children going to cope? And you know what his answer was? He said, children in today's generation need to love to learn. And what does that mean? You take a good teacher that you especially liked, you try to take classes by that teacher, you try to emulate that teacher's behavior, you try to find something that you're interested in doing and pursuing, and you still can get a good, productive life. But you have to somewhat be self-motivated and have to love to learn to do it. I don't particularly know what the answers are to the Chicago public school system is. I don't really even claim to know what's even good for me for an education, because I myself went to a brand new high school in Algonquin, Illinois called Harry D. Jacobs High School. And at that time, you know, they had something called the open classroom concept, where the walls of the school were paper thin and there were no doors on the walls. Well, it turned out that shortly after the first year of school, students were disturbed because they could hear what's happening in the next classroom and the next classroom over. So after about the first year or two, doors were put back on the schools. They put in better soundproofing between the classrooms. And of course, they lengthened the time from 4 minutes to 6 minutes between classes so students could actually use the bathroom between classes and walk from one class to another. And they did something what they called opened up the commons area, not just at lunchtime, but gave juniors and seniors a chance to not have to sit in a study hall when they didn't have class. There was a lot that went on at my own school, but you know, the one thing that I did learn at that school was learning how to learn. And for any of you guys here, it seems like a lot of you are kind of stuck in a 60s or 50s mentality of workers in management, of socialist exploitation, of this, that, and the other thing, and you've lost the ability to learn how to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I do know still how to learn. I can basically remember about 10 years ago when I took a college level class for the first time in maybe 20 years. And how hard it was for me to study at night on something I really liked doing. I took a long class in computers, and I took it not to get a better job, but to learn how to repair my own home PC. And that class basically went over the Microsoft certification exam, the MCSE, networking, web design, the whole bit. But needless to say, you know, I was able to take a 9-week class between jobs during that time, and I'll tell you, I may not have learned everything I wanted to in that class at that time, but that knowledge that I had gained paid off in huge dividends 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And in fact, today, with my video habit that I have with a 12 terabyte system, the linking of 3 systems together, a home Wi-Fi network, would have been what a major corporation would have barely had in the early 90s. And that to me, when I look at my nephew who's into programming, and he can go in and be a lot faster in linking a smartphone together to a computer than I could, and he could look apart and rip apart an electronic device and fix it quicker than I could. Well, I don't have so much, pessimism for the next generation. I just think that it's going to take a lot more learning how to learn from a self-motivating standpoint to have a good life. And yes, maybe our manufacturing base has gone down a little bit in this country, but we're certainly making a lot more goods than we did. Productivity of workers has increased. What hasn't is real wages. But I think that as the economy gets a little better, we're going to be seeing better jobs coming back. One of the biggest examples of education is what's happened at Google through their CEOs, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. They were both from the Montessori school's methodology. And they kind of run their company on the same type of methodology. They learn something, they try it out. If it works, they proceed. If it doesn't work, they can the project. There was a recent news article where they were going to launch 40,000 balloons around the world into the stratosphere powered by solar panels that they could all of a sudden link up the rest of the world to the internet. It's a harebrained idea that just might or might not work. But it took a culture of innovation. It took a culture of learning how to learn, learning how to fail, and then trying again, which basically is the way things should work in a capitalist economy. We see a lot of that today in the thing, but I think what's really neglected in education is that spirit of innovation. You know, we have had a lot of try it now, do this, do that, but not so much a culture of innovation. It's almost, in a sense, too corporatized. you know, you have Chicago public schools and they treat these students like employees, wanting to lay them off, so to speak, at the local school and not realizing the community roots. Perhaps maybe it might be time to perhaps do away with CPS and maybe make them ward districts where the alderman appoints the board. We may have a better system like that, where we can have maybe 26 or 27 different types of school districts in the city of Chicago. It works out in the suburbs where they have a lot less centralized control and a lot smaller areas of space and an elected board. Perhaps it's just like anything else, too much bureaucracy and not enough innovation or plutocracy, so to speak. Now, I think that this spirit that Thomas L. Friedman says of learning how to learn and with a little bit of an innovative spirit is exactly what the Chicago public schools need. Maybe the charter school thing won't work, but it certainly at least needs to be given a shot. Perhaps a union-driven teacher school might be something else to try. Perhaps maybe some other kind of different types of education. Perhaps maybe a partnership with the Chicago Diocese of Rockford and the reintroduction of some religion into some of the other schools might work. Perhaps maybe taking the spirit of atheism and materialism and putting it into another school might work. But the bottom line is, you know, this is not a new problem. Henry Ford, in his wisdom and what or lack thereof, introduced a program to school people, and it was called the McGuffey Readers, which were used for well over 30 years to educate a bunch of children. You know, I just don't know what the answer is, but I do know it lies somewhere in between innovating and teaching kids how to learn and to love learning. And if there's a message I want to get out there to anybody, learn how to love to learn and keep learning. It's a lifelong skill that's essential to keep yourself living.
Thank you, Tim Bolger.
Yes, well, I like to subscribe to that. I think I had something to do with trying to do innovation a little bit in education. I was involved with a group, a not-for-profit organization for a few years. When I was working nights, I would go down to the schools during the day, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and try to add a little bit to the classrooms. Actually, it was mostly a few schools that were down near the Hyde Park area, but in the underprivileged neighborhoods that we went to, and this would be trying to interest them in things like understanding a little bit of Shakespeare with some drama, maybe having a drama about George Washington Carver or something like that, or about the astronauts. Or teaching them a little bit about geology by actually bringing in parts of my rock collection, having the kids at least actually have to be able to feel what a fossil feels like, or see what a crystalline structure is of a mineral. How amazed they were that salt was really a mineral, halite, and that the crystal structure actually could be explained by alternating atoms of sodium and chlorine. So little things like that actually by presenting them in a dramatic or just a more interesting manner did actually cut through a little bit, although some of the classes had these disciplinary problems. So there are a lot of problems with the school system, and I have to say that they are not the quality of the teachers. The teachers, I found, were in general very dedicated people and very interested in trying to raise their students' level of education and doing the best they could. They weren't all as highly educated as I was, but I was kind of surprised that they were very certainly adequate to the task if they had had not so many problems with the fact that the kids were underprivileged. And that, a lot of that has been brought out by our speaker. And I was a little bit disturbed at some people like having a slightly hostile attitude toward her, because she's really on the side of the angels here and is trying to come up with the answers as much as we can. Now, I did point out the Finnish model because just as a little chance to give her a chance to talk about it, but it is part of what I was referring to earlier, that I think that the teachers in our public school system just need more of an opportunity to find innovation, to get a chance to not have to teach to these silly tests, which just foster rote learning. And unfortunately, that is what our corporate model of our society wants to do. They've ever since the 60s, they've been really trying to destroy the public education system model that might lead to innovation amongst the students themselves, or critical thinking, any of those good things that those of us at the college of complexes here would like to foster, because we are the pinnacle of critical thinking, I'm sure, right? But the solutions are there. Many people have written about them. Their mentoring was mentioned here. I mean, if our teachers that are in their public school had the support they needed, they would seek out mentors, and they would seek out many of the tools that are now available on the internet, that are available in books, in videos. I mean, there's many people in the education field who have come up with extremely good ways. I was in my own way trying to come up with ways to motivate the students, as Bob Lichtenberg was asking, how do we do this? I was in my own way trying to do that. If I had been able to focus on it instead of having another job all the time, I could have made a little more progress with it, and I was maybe had a swelled head in thinking that I was going to make more progress in it when I was involved with it. But there are so many good people who are innovative and have come up with many of these strategies for motivating students, but they're not really being used because of these terrible bureaucratic people that just do not seek it out themselves. And if it came a little bit from the top down of, well, these tools are available to you, these educators who have found ways to get through to the students about learning science or learning to be interested in poetry or drama. I mean, we had the kids reciting poetry in the 7th and 8th grade in front of their classmates, and they were getting into it. We had them playing little rudimentary Shakespeare scenes. I mean, I did change the language a little bit so it was easier for them to do it, but we did a lot of that stuff, and we had them interested in going to field trips, for example, to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, after I prepped them for music appreciation. So those things are possible, they just have to be spurred by the people in charge, instead of this nonsense of maybe browbeating into them that Columbus discovered America in 1492, which of course we know he didn't, because Leif Erikson was there earlier. And it's very possible that that there were voyagers that went across even in the Ice Age. Anyway, from across the Atlantic Ocean in the Ice Age. Anyway, I will close with those remarks, and I thank the speaker very much for being here.
So those of you who think innovation doesn't work, huh? We had a hockey team that was ran by a father who thought he knew how to make an organization go, and it didn't produce results. It wasn't until his son took over that organization and brought in some new management techniques, new players and new talents. The Hawks won the 2000 World Series, and tonight they're on to the next game because they just won again. The spirit of innovation keeps on going.
Go team, go.
Go Hawks!
Well, I do believe that the Hawks didn't win the World Series. They might have won the Stanley Cup.
Okay, the Stanley Cup.
But not the World Series.
That's
so.
my Cubs training talking.
Well, that's your illiteracy. Anyway, I forgot my glasses. I'm sorry.
Oh, dear.
And the real irony is I'm not even a sports fan. And I know that. For those of you who might be interested, Wednesday the 26th of June, there will be a picket in front of the Chicago Public School headquarters at 125 South Clark Street. There is a board meeting that day, and the picket will be people objecting to the school closings. We were talking about kids who were in the special education programs. When they close the school, there will be 2,000 special education students who will have to move to other schools. There is no way that you can make appropriate arrangements for these children who are counting on a consistent, stable education in schools with teachers they know, in surroundings that they are familiar with other people in the school who they know because they've been there for several years. You can't make those kinds of accommodations, and you can't do it. We're closing schools and we're throwing out of work tens of thousands of teachers and principals and school staffs who will not be able to find work anyplace else in the educational system. I am on a local school council, which anybody can be on as a community member, or can just go to your local school for the council meetings and see what the school has to deal with. And what we were doing was hiring a new teacher, and we had principal come to, we were hiring a new principal because that's one of the responsibilities, the legal responsibilities of a local school council, is to hire a new principal for the school if that's necessary. We had a principal from one of the schools that was being closed come and interview for the job. It was evident that this gentleman was extraordinarily well qualified, was passionate about education, was dedicated to his job, and they were closing his school even though he was the head of that school and was the only school that was turned around with the No Child Left Behind school closings that happened in this city about 10 years ago. And he's in his mid-50s, and they just tossed him out the window. He's so much garbage as far as the public school system is concerned. He worked together with the children in that school, with the parents in that school, with the teachers in that school to turn that school around so those children were getting a decent education. And that doesn't count. And so what that means to me is that our city is absolutely turning its back on the social responsibility that we have as a city, as a state, as a country, to actually educate our children, to be citizens, to be informed citizens, to be critical thinkers, and to be able to run the country as a democracy. And so what we're really doing is we are making it not possible, or making it extraordinarily difficult for a democracy to operate here.
No.
And so I think that Rahm Emanuel should be brought to task. I think the school board should be elected. And I think that that we as citizens need to hold our government. We need to hold them to be responsible. We need to hold their feet to the fire. And we really have to make it possible for a school system to function in a functional way in this system, in this world. 30 kids to a classroom, 40 kids to a classroom is not a functional classroom. We need 15 or 25 students to a classroom, 15 to 20 students to a classroom. We need special education teachers with very small numbers of students. We need lots of language programs and cultural programs that enrich our students. We need music and art. We need physical education every day for every student. Because if you think that you can develop, a child can develop cognitively and not develop physically, you are wrong. It's something that has to happen together. If you don't have physical education in a school, particularly in a primary school, your children are not learning well. That's research-based. You can go into the literature and you find that documentation. We are doing an extraordinarily, almost evil disservice to most of the students, and certainly all of the students in the public educational system. We are doing a disservice to the children who go into the charter school systems, because they are making it, the charter school systems aren't any better, and in fact are probably somewhat worse than the public school systems, with studies that have been done with the Pew organization on outcomes in charter schools. They don't work as well. And there are many of them that are failing. Their students are failing. And what they act to do is to segregate students. In the Southwest, the kids that go to the charter schools are white, and the kids that go to the public schools are Mexican American. Period, end of sentence. So we've resegregated our schools with the charter schools. We've done our society an incredible disservice, and I really, and I hold not just the politicians, but the people of the city of Chicago responsible for that.
Thank you, Mark.
Research, it's research to transform education. Good idea, I think. Very good idea, and I think it does clarify the issues. Certainly need information about such matters as teacher evaluation, which our speaker provided. And I like to approach that education is not a business whatsoever. It's a way of relating of people, of Jean mentioned the old leading the young, bringing up the young. That's what the word education means. So that research is very good. Lord knows we need transformation. But how is this research to be implemented? That's another question. That's political questions. That's the one that's usually toe pain, you know where. So I wish them good luck, and all you could really do is put it out there and come here and be abused and do other things, you know, to try to get your ideas across. I want to talk about my own experiences as an educator. I was quite discouraged by them. I was mostly discouraged by the large number of students who were totally blinded by materialism and the need to get a job and to make money and to survive, and that's the only thing they cared about. And they closed themselves off totally from anything else. And there are large numbers of these students in colleges, large numbers. That made the job extremely dispiriting. These students who are blinded by consumerism, materialism, and economics, or worshiping an idol for sure, a false god of money. And where did they get this god from? Oh, they got it from our damn society, our stupid society, who doesn't care anything except about stuff. You know, getting more stuff and distracting yourself from life.
The depths of life, certainly, and living on the shallow surface of life is enough for most people. Well, that's really pathetic. That's really sad if they're content with that, although their happiness should be found there too, definitely. But, you know, despite all the discouragement I experienced, I did have some successes too. Actually, a fair number. Just a tremendous amount of discouragement too. But a lot of success. And there was success of life's greatest goals, which is to get humans to use their brains to understand ideas and to use ideas and abstractions, which are the crowning glory of humans, to be guided by high ideals, to know that your life is really good, and it's good not just because you made a lot of money, yeah, but it's good because you helped other people. You really helped a lot of other people along the way, and you also made the world a little bit more just for your existing, and you experienced a lot of beauty in your own life. And there's nothing greater than that. Maybe you even created a little yourself, and you lived a free life, and you weren't caused to do everything you did by economics, as Karl Marx pretty much was on the mark. As far as the scientific statement goes, philosophical, it's terrible. You know, the economic determinism. But students can be taught to innovate just by thinking of their own ideas and coming up with their own answers and rejecting their stupid society's answers, which are shallow as hell. And just to conclude, I think the way research and education is most beneficial is that if we instill in students a sense of wonder, wonder about the lives, wonder about the many questions that we all face, and our need to answer the deepest of those questions. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank you again for a very nice presentation. Let's see, I'll be eclectic as usual here. Actually, during the week, I was reading an editorial. The number of people majoring in the humanities is virtually non-existent these days. I think it's down to 15%, which saddens me. I think that's crucial and important, but I guess we're living in your utilitarian society, Tim, and they want innovators and instead of thinkers. And people feel. Let's see, I asked about education in the progressive era. From my understanding, they looked upon education as the solution to many of the social problems we discussed here at the college. However, you have to be cautious. At that time, it made very good sense. Education was, in fact, probably a great equalizer and a means of acculturation and advancement of an immigrant population. You cannot take education, however, and use it as an answer to any or all problems in society. I've also seen that done. I think, oh, well, if we just have education or educate people. I was arguing with one guy there about guns. He said, oh, we just have to educate people about guns, and then they'll use them correctly. Or something. I go, well, I'm not certain about that. Anyhow, that's just a historical thing. And do we need to disseminate legitimate research? Most assuredly, there's all sorts of hypothetical opinions regarding education. I've suffered through them. What I call education evenings here at the college for a number of years. Yes, I mean, there's an expression used, you have your experts and I have mine, but let's see what they really say. As education is certainly within the city undergone a transition, and there's been a lot of change. Certainly demographically. Have the schools kept up with this, or You know, I was thinking here, do schools merely reflect the changes that have been going on? They're not, you know, are they a controlling factor or responding to the situation? There were things that are kind of interesting thing. Does the school establish a neighborhood or reflect the neighborhood? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. We're going to have another program, not too distant future, at the college, and the conservative people, the Illinois Policy Institute, are going to be here, which they have a very select, specific point of view regarding this. Regarding the charter schools, I really know nothing about the issue, but there appears to have been, we're generally coming about two camps on this. Many years ago, we had a number of libertarians who attended the college, and they were homeschoolers. And I couldn't understand why they were taking their children out of traditional schools because they objected to the type of history and social studies that was being taught, but they thought that was sufficient cause here. You know, and last of all, I'm going to be teaching at the college next week. Now, I'm going to lay down some rules for you guys.
Save it for next week.
You are here to learn. I'm the teacher. There's no participation, man.
Save it for next week.
Sit down.
Save it for next week.
Shut up. And I don't.
Save it for next week. Save it for next week, Charlie.
Progressive baloney. I'm here. You sit out and listen, and you just appreciate. You thank me, sir. You try to absorb it. I know it's going to be hard for you guys, but close your eyes, you know, and think real hard. But anyhow, thank you very much.
Okay, Bram, are you going to go?
No, I'm not going.
Speaker gets the last word.
That's right.
I'm not in, thank you.
All right.
I feel like I'm not in an argument with anyone, but if I would come when the charter school people come, I would be. You know, teachers, go support a teacher. People think, Isaac Asimov was once asked, isn't 97% of science fiction crap? And he said 97% of everything is crap.
That's Theodore Sturgeon.
Asimov, but we can keep it.
No, Sturgeon's law, 90% of everything is crap.
So, you know, some people think that teachers, they should be bashed these days, right? They're a really easy target. 76% of them are women. It's an easy target. So, two things, and I'll go away. Support a teacher. My teachers are losing their jobs for speaking out, right? It's affecting all of us. So they take a tremendous professional and personal risk when they speak out. So remember that, you know, even coming here, it's hard times. So say what you do. You know, what can I do? You know, do you need some pens? What do you need for your classroom? And I want to thank you because, as I said when I opened, a lot of us are very distraught. We're supposed to be solving this, right? In the wrong way. Unschooling, close it down. What do we do? What do we do? We see glimmers. We see wonderful, wonderful schools in Chicago, and we see the LSCs. Support the LSCs, support the elected school board, and support teachers and kids. And thank you for having me, because you made my heart warm.
All right.
I feel better.
All right, very good.
I want to,
You guys learn.
thank you for